September 1941, on the vast plains of Ukraine, the flames of war raged. The German armored forces surged forward. Fighting broke out for the key Soviet city of Kyiv. In just a few weeks, the Battle of Kyiv transformed from a defense into a brutal encirclement. Over 700,000 Soviet soldiers were trapped by more than 500,000 Germans. Hunger, exhaustion, and fear weighed on every soldier. As the German forces closed in, the encirclement slowly tightened. In the end, 660,000 Soviet soldiers were captured. The Battle of Kyiv is considered the largest encirclement in history. What decisions and strategic mistakes lay behind this battle? Today, let's return to the Ukrainian battlefield 83 years ago to explore the Battle of Kyiv. Kyiv was the capital of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. It was also a key strategic gateway for the Soviet Union in the southwest. Kyiv was located in the heart of the East European plain, with flat surrounding terrain. This made it ideal for large-scale mechanized forces. This made it a prime target for German armored divisions. For Germany, Kyiv was a crucial link to controlling the Caucasus oil fields in the Donbas industrial region. For the Soviet Union, it was not just a political symbol, but also a crucial defense of the southwest. The battle for Kyiv. This conflict became more than just a fight for a city. It was pivotal in determining the fate of Ukraine and the entire Soviet southern front. On June 22, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, deploying 3 army groups. To the north was Army Group North, led by von Lepp. Their goal was to capture Leningrad. In the center was Army Group Center, led by von Bock. Their goal was to advance all the way to Moscow. To the south was Army Group South, led by von Rundstedt. Their goal was Kyiv and the industrial and agricultural areas behind it. After the war began, the Germans achieved great victories in the north and center, but Army Group South didn't advance as quickly into the heart of the Soviet Union. Though they captured the eastern Polish territories held by the Soviets in just 8 days, the Soviet Southwestern Front retreated to the 1939 border with its strong defenses, known as the Stalin Line. The Soviet forces put up fierce resistance, which slowed down Army Group South's progress. With the northern territories lost, a dangerous bulge formed in the southwest. The creation of this bulge was the result of both Soviet and German actions. From the German side, the southern advance was delayed, mainly due to fewer and less capable forces compared to Army Group Center. Army Group South consisted of 3 German armies and 2 Romanian armies. These forces were a mix of quality, with poorly trained soldiers. This weakened their overall fighting capacity, and the South only had 1 armored group, and like the Central Army Group, composed entirely of elite German forces, which had 2 armored groups, making them incomparable. From the Soviet side, Stalin placed great importance on Ukraine's position. In pre-war military simulations, Stalin predicted Germany would first seize Ukraine's food, Donbas coal, and Caucasus oil, so he was certain that Ukraine would be the main target of Germany's attack. Under Stalin's absolute authority, Ukraine's defenses were heavily reinforced. The dense rivers and marshes in western Ukraine slowed down the German advance. As a result, Army Group South's advance in Ukraine was slow. Meanwhile, Army Group Center had already advanced to Smolensk, known as the gateway to Moscow. Thus, a unique bulge formed in the southwest. History shows that bulges often end with enemies encircling from the flanks. This was undoubtedly a thorn in the side of the advancing Germans. Starting July 6th, Army Group South advanced to the Stalin Line at the Volinsky settlement area. The positions fell within 2 days. The Germans broke through and moved around to the rear of the Stalin Line. The Soviet plan to hold the old border failed. The German 1st Panzer Group advanced 110 kilometers in just 2 days and reached the outskirts of Kyiv by July 11th. As the Germans closed in on Kyiv, Stalin appointed Marshal Budyonny as the commander of the Southwestern Front, tasked with overseeing Kyiv's defense. The Ukraine is generally flat. Kyiv had natural defenses. The Dnieper River flows through Kyiv and then turns east. Its tributary, the Irpin River, forms a semi-surrounding on the west side. Together, these rivers protected Kyiv's southwestern sides, creating a double natural defense. Kyiv's outer defenses were centered around the city, stretching 80 to 85 kilometers outward. The main defense was a network of 257 permanent bunkers completed by the end of 1938. These bunkers were equipped with machine guns and 203mm artillery. Along with temporary defenses built after the war broke out, they formed the Kyiv fortification zone. The fortifications extended along the Irpin River. The defense line extended 1 to 6 kilometers deep, aided by river barriers and marshlands. While Kyiv's defenses weren't impregnable, they were still very well organized. the Germans launched their attack after reaching the Irpin River on Kyiv's western outskirts. They faced strong resistance from Soviet forces in the outer defenses. Seeing that a direct assault failed, the Germans had to shift their focus southward. Army Group South split its attack into two directions. One focused on attacking Kyiv directly, while the other aimed to cross the Dnieper from the south and strike Kyiv's rear. Kleist's 1st Panzer Group used its high mobility to advance south of Kyiv, cutting off Soviet forces' communication with their main units. Meanwhile, German Army Group 17 began advancing east. Finally, by August 2nd, the two units encircled the Soviet 6th and 12th Armies in Uman. The German 16th Panzer Division and Hungarian mechanized units met there the next day. A second encirclement was formed. The Soviet forces inside the encirclement put up fierce resistance. Many units fought hand-to-hand once they ran out of ammunition. Even hundreds of military dogs were sent into battle. But facing the German encirclement, these two Soviet armies had no chance to break out and were doomed to destruction. In the Battle of Uman, the Germans suffered around 20,000 casualties. The Soviets lost about 100,000 men, with another 100,000 captured. To Soviet army commanders, Major General Muzashenko and Brigadier General Panyov, along with their 4 Corps commanders and 11 division commanders, were captured. After the Battle of Uman, the road to Kryvyi Rih, Odessa, and Mykolaiv was now wide open. These cities were vital iron ore, port, and industrial hubs. More importantly, Kleist's 1st Panzer Group advanced to the southeastern bank of the Dnieper River near Kyiv. They now had the possibility to cross the river and encircle Kyiv from behind. The Soviet southern front began retreating east, abandoning the defense of Kyiv. The southwestern front defense zone, mainly along the Dnieper River, became a dangerous bulge. It was now facing the threat of encirclement. In early August, Army Group South still aimed to strongly assault Kyiv, but some of their gains were quickly reversed by Soviet counterattacks. By August 15th, on the front lines near Kyiv, both sides shifted to defense, and the German 1st Panzer Group made little progress across the Dnieper River. Faced with slow progress from Army Group South, Hitler altered his original plan. The fate of Kyiv was about to take a new turn. By mid-August, the situation on the Soviet-German front stabilized, and the German advance slowed. The Soviets began to deploy their defenses systematically. The German Army Group North was halted outside Leningrad. Meanwhile, Army Group Center had captured the vital city of Smolensk. Seeing that Army Group South couldn't break through around Kyiv, Hitler decided to halt the advance toward Moscow. He reallocated forces from Army Group Center to support the South. Through cooperation between two army groups, they aimed to open up a breakthrough at Kyiv, to push the battle forward, but this led to a shift in the main direction of the German attack. This clearly went against the original plan of Operation Barbarossa. Many German generals opposed this change. Army Chief of Staff Halder and Army Group Center's Commander von Bock even flew to meet Hitler, urging him to reconsider, but Hitler refused to change his mind. He ultimately gave the order. The 2nd Army and 2nd Panzer Group of Army Group Center were to abandon the attack toward Moscow, and instead, they moved south into Ukraine to strike at Kyiv's rear. The 2nd Panzer Group was the main striking force of the Germans. It included 5 panzer divisions, 3 motorized infantry divisions, and a prestigious infantry unit, the Groß Deutschland Division. Its commander was the famous father of Blitzkrieg, Guderian. The 2nd Army was tasked with protecting the flanks of the Panzer Group, while Kleist's 1st Panzer Group prepared to push across the Dnieper River to launch a pincer attack with Guderian's Panzer Group to encircle the defenders of Kyiv. Hitler's sudden shift in attack direction was a key factor in determining the outcome of the Battle of Kyiv. Although Guderian's move south was a last-minute decision, the large troop movement gave the Soviets enough time to react. While Army Group Center stabilized its lines, large numbers of armored units began to assemble in the south, based on past German tactics. This signaled the start of a new Blitzkrieg offensive. Soviet Chief of Staff Zhukov noticed this movement and quickly realized that Army Group Center might send forces south to join forces with Army Group South to attack the Red Army near Kyiv. Recognizing the danger, Zhukov suggested to Stalin a strategic retreat was necessary. Allow the southwestern front to withdraw from Kyiv and strengthen the defense of Moscow. Stalin was furious at Zhukov's suggestion to abandon Kyiv. He angrily dismissed Zhukov, saying it was nonsense to abandon Kyiv, and removed him from his position as Chief of Staff. He was reassigned to the Reserve Army Command. Zhukov knew he couldn't convince Stalin to pull back the defenders of Kyiv. He could only suggest creating a powerful force to block the German armored forces heading south in the Bryansk region. This request was granted by Stalin. As early as August 14th, the Soviet High Command decided to form the Bryansk Front to fill the gap in Army Group Songter's attack. They decided to form the Bryansk Front after predicting the movement of German forces southward to encircle Kyiv. The responsibility of blocking them fell to the newly formed Bryansk Front, and another key figure emerged in the battle for Kyiv. This was the commander of the Bryansk Front, Yeryomenko. Yeryomenko was different from other commanders. He was very obedient to Stalin's wishes. He enthusiastically followed Stalin's orders, but his battlefield performance was mediocre. In a conversation with Stalin on August 24th, Yeryomenko accepted all the reinforcements allocated by the High Command. He promised confidently that he would block Guderian's forces. Yeryomenko acted arrogantly in front of Stalin, dismissing Guderian as a mere villain. Due to overconfidence in Yeryomenko, Stalin's resolve to defend Kyiv became even more unshakable. The Southwestern Front had no choice but to trust Yeryomenko. They focused their defenses elsewhere, trusting their rear to the Bryansk Front. The Bryansk Front's defenses were mainly along the Zhesna River, but Yeryomenko, who claimed expertise in tank warfare, lined up his forces along the river. He failed to set up proper defenses, and after 8 days of intense fighting, although the Bryansk Front suffered significant losses, it couldn't hold back the German offensive. The Soviet High Command watched as the German 2nd Panzer Division crossed the Zhesna River, rushing toward the rear of the Southwestern Front. On September 2nd, the High Command sent a telegram to Yeryomenko expressing dissatisfaction with the situation. The enemy had only suffered minor losses. The task was to destroy Guderian's forces. Yeryomenko immediately explained to the High Command how complex the situation was, and promised to send blocking units to stop Guderian's forces from advancing further. Yeryomenko sent the 17th and 18th Tank Divisions south to reinforce the Southwestern Front. However, these divisions were quickly hit hard by Guderian's forces. They failed to provide any support to the Southwestern Front. Meanwhile, the Southwestern Front was still hoping that Allies could hold off Guderian's panzer group. They had no extra forces to protect their rear. September 7th, Guderian's armored forces had advanced south to Konotop. The Bryansk Front failed to block the enemy. Kyiv was at risk of being encircled. Shaposhnikov, who replaced Zhukov as chief of staff, led his trusted officers. Minister of Defense Vasilevsky urged Stalin to act. They requested to withdraw the Southwestern Front from Kyiv. Stalin's response was furious. He was enraged. He nearly lost control, rejecting the withdrawal request. He scolded the general staff for seeking shortcuts. In Shaposhnikov and Vasilevsky's view, even if Stalin agreed to the retreat, the Southwestern Front would have to pay a heavy price to preserve some fighting strength, and holding Kyiv would only make things worse. But Stalin firmly refused to allow a retreat. At this point, the situation was beyond repair. By September 9, Guderian's 24th Motorized Division had crossed the Zhesna River. This signaled the failure of Yeryomenko's blocking mission. The 24th Motorized Division also recovered a Soviet troop deployment document from a downed aircraft. By analyzing this document, the Germans found a weak link between the Soviet 13th and 21st Armies. German armored forces immediately launched a fierce attack on this gap. The breach was quickly exploited. German forces began streaming into the rear of Kyiv, facing the suddenly shifted front. To the south, Kleist's 1st Panzer Group intensified its push across the Dnieper. The German High Command set the meeting point for the two panzer groups at Romny. At this point, Soviet Southwestern Front Commander Marshal Budyny also realized the danger. He requested twice, on September 9 and 11, to withdraw his forces eastward. He sent Southwestern Front Commander Kirpones by plane to Moscow to present the necessity of a retreat in person to Stalin. Stalin not only rejected the request to retreat, but also believed Budyny was avoiding battle. He dismissed him on the spot. Replacing commanders in the heat of battle has always been a military taboo. Stalin dismissed Budyny without much rational consideration. It was mainly because Budyny opposed Stalin's will to hold Kyiv. On September 13, the command of the Southwestern Front was given to Marshal Timoshenko. Timoshenko, to please Stalin, focused on reinforcing defenses instead of avoiding and blocking the German flanking movements. He passively strengthened the defense. This left the Southwestern Front unprepared for the complex situation. It was Stalin's stubborn approach that ultimately led to the collapse of the Southwestern Front. While Guderian made significant progress from the north, the 1st Panzer Group from the south also sought to break through the Dnieper River. Meanwhile, the Soviets on the east bank of the Dnieper could only deploy a weakened 38th Army to defend a 200-kilometer front with just 7 understrength divisions. The Germans feigned attacks to mislead the Soviets. They launched multiple feints in the Cherkasy area. This kept the 38th Army's reserves tightly engaged. At the location where the Germans planned to cross the river, The Soviets left only an infantry division to defend a 54-kilometer stretch of the riverbank. The Germans chose the crossing point at Kremenchuk, which was the weakest part of the entire defense line. On August 30th, the divisions of the 1st Panzer Group broke through Kremenchuk, which was only defended by a single Soviet infantry regiment. Fighting continued until September 12. The Germans fully established a landing site at Kremenchuk, and large German forces began crossing. With the loss of natural defenses, the Soviets couldn't resist the German advance. The southern gateway of the southwestern front was torn open. The 1st Panzer Group moved swiftly after crossing the Dnieper River. The advance units covered about 70 kilometers in 12 hours. September 10 to 12 was a crucial period in the Battle of Kyiv. Not only did the 1st Panzer Group break through the Dnieper, the 2nd Panzer Group also captured the planned assembly point at Romny and was preparing to continue southward. The German encirclement of Kyiv was about to be completed. The leaders of the southwestern front urgently reported to the Soviet High Command, recommending the immediate evacuation of Kyiv to prevent further deterioration of the situation. But Stalin believed the enemy at Romny was a minor force and still refused to authorize the southwestern front's retreat to preserve their fighting strength. Southwestern Front Commander General Kirponis took the risk of court-martial and ordered the troops to withdraw, but when the High Command discovered this, they quickly rescinded the order. Instead, they ordered the Southwestern Front to counterattack. At this point, the last hope of the Southwestern Front was snuffed out between the two panzer groups. On the night of September 14th, the vanguard of the German panzer groups met at Vytsyazovka. The massive encirclement, formed by two army groups, closed the next day. This encirclement, covering 135,000 square kilometers, enclosed almost the entire southwestern front. As the troops were encircled, on September 14th and 15th, General Kirponis of the Southwestern Front sent two more urgent reports to the High Command, reporting the dire battlefield situation and requesting a retreat. At this point, the High Command and Southwestern Front headquarters agreed to the withdrawal of Kyiv's defenders. However, by this time, the Southwestern Front's communications had been severed by the Germans. The retreat orders could only be relayed orally by an order messenger flying in by plane. So, it wasn't until September 17th that the Southwestern Front received the retreat order, but by then it was the third day after the German encirclement closed. It was too late. Kyiv fell on September 19th. By September 20th, the Germans split the Southwestern Front into 6 parts and proceeded to destroy them one by one in the following days. The 37th Army, which held out the longest, was stationed in the Yagody area. They resisted until September 26th. In the Battle of Kyiv, the Soviet Southwestern Front was almost completely destroyed, with 5 armies being wiped out. The Soviets lost about 800,000 men, of which 665,000 were captured. Only about 20,000 managed to break out of the German encirclement. The Germans suffered only over 60,000 casualties. Apart from commanders like Timoshenko, Budyny, and Khrushchev, the rest of the Soviet commanders perished. Southwestern Front Commander Kirponis and Political Commissar Vermashchenko, Chief of Staff Tupikov also perished during the breakout. The Soviets also lost 884 tanks, 3,718 guns, and 3,500 vehicles. The Battle of Kyiv is thus considered the largest encirclement in history. Many people might argue that the Battle of Kyiv was not the largest encirclement. The Battle of Stalingrad also resulted in the encirclement of the Germans, with a larger scale and casualties than Kyiv. This view is not entirely accurate. First, let's consider the nature of the battles. The Battle of Stalingrad was more of a war of attrition. The battle occurred in multiple stages with a very complex situation. The objective of the Battle of Kyiv was simpler. It was to encircle and destroy the southwestern front near Kyiv. It lacked the complex strategic context and counterattacks of Stalingrad, so in terms of encirclement, it fits the definition of the largest encirclement battle. In terms of the size of the encirclement, the Battle of Kyiv was even larger. The Kyiv encirclement trapped the entire southwestern front, about 700,000 men, whereas the Stalingrad encirclement only trapped the German 6th Army, about 300,000 men. So in terms of the area of the encirclement and the number of trapped soldiers, Kyiv was larger. Some may say the 1945 Prague battle had more encircled, with 900,000 Germans surrounded by the Soviets. However, it cannot be considered a true battle. The battle took place from May 6 to 11. By then, the European front was essentially over. Germany had signed the surrender on May 8. The German army had been ordered to stop resisting, so the Prague battle, despite surrounding 900,000 Germans, was more like a post-war prisoner-receiving operation. Therefore, the Battle of Kyiv is still generally considered the largest encirclement in history. So, what contributed to the German victory in Kyiv? And why did 660,000 Soviet soldiers surrender? The core reasons can be summarized into points. First, the Soviets lacked air superiority, leading to a complete cutoff of supply lines. In the early stages of the war, the Soviet Air Force was weak and could not establish air superiority, so they could not provide sufficient airdrops to the encircled Soviet forces. This resulted in serious shortages of air support and material transport. With the supply lines fully cut off, Soviet soldiers lacked food and medical supplies. Their combat effectiveness drastically declined. If the Soviets had proper air supply, they wouldn't have lost so quickly. Take Stalingrad for example. Though 300,000 of the German 6th Army were surrounded, because the German Air Force could supply them daily, reaching 800 tons of supplies per day at peak. The Germans in the encirclement held out for 72 days. In the Battle of Kyiv, the 700,000 Soviets had nothing after being encircled, so, less than 10 days after the encirclement closed, exhausted and starved, Soviet soldiers started to surrender one by one. Second, the Soviet tactics were rigid, and their units fought separately. At the beginning of the Battle of Kyiv, the Soviets showed heroic resistance, launching several counterattacks. But because Stalin issued a strict no-retreat order, the 5 Soviet armies rigidly held their positions. This gave the Germans the chance to infiltrate the gaps and split the southwestern front into 6 parts. The Soviets lacked coordination among their own forces. The Germans used their powerful panzer groups and mobility to compress the encirclement, defeating each of the 6 encircled armies. If these scattered forces had retreated quickly after the encirclement closed, converging to defend Kyiv or break out, though they couldn't change the outcome of the war, they wouldn't have lost so completely. The Battle of Kyiv was a tactical victory for the Germans, but it hid problems that would affect the course of the war, which would leave serious issues for the future. Many German generals believed the Battle of Kyiv greatly delayed the best opportunity for an attack on Moscow. Due to the time spent in Kyiv in the troop movements, the Germans could have launched their Moscow offensive after the Smolensk battle in August, but it was delayed until October. By then, the weather had become colder, and before the harsh winter arrived, the Soviet autumn rains made things even more difficult. It seemed that the weather wasn't on Germany's side. The weather in 1941 was extremely harsh. The winter was freezing cold. The autumn of that year saw the heaviest rainfall in Ukraine in half a century, turning roads into impassable mud. Many German transport vehicles got stuck in the mud. Tanks, trucks, and supply vehicles couldn't move properly. Even infantry movements became extremely difficult. The muddy roads slowed the army's advance. It also delayed supply lines to the front. This put immense pressure on German logistics and severely affected the progress of Operation Barbarossa. Meanwhile, the Soviets used this time to strengthen Moscow's defenses. Muscovites were called to urgently construct many strong fortifications to defend against the German armored forces. The Soviets constructed multiple defensive lines in front of Moscow and dug numerous trenches and bunkers to stop the enemy's advance. After the Battle of Kyiv, the Soviets, relying on their vast population and mobilization ability, quickly gathered a large number of reserve troops to form new armies. These measures greatly enhanced Moscow's defense capabilities. Moreover, the defeat in the Battle of Kyiv led Stalin to reflect on his mistakes. He realized that delegating military command to experienced generals was the right choice. Thus, Stalin appointed Zhukov, who had often advised him, as the overall commander for the defense of Moscow, and gave him full trust and support. This move not only stabilized Soviet morale, but also set the stage for future victories. The Germans performed exceptionally well in the Battle of Kyiv. It was a textbook example of a perfect encirclement, but as Guderian said, the Battle of Kyiv was a tactical victory, but a strategic failure. Do you think Germany should have fought the Battle of Kyiv? Was it right or wrong to occupy Ukraine? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and see you in the next video.